The bravest people are the ones who don't mind looking like cowards. Perhaps we all give the best of our hearts uncritically to those who hardly think about us in return. The destiny of man is to unite, not to divide. If you keep on dividing, you end up as a collection of monkeys throwing nuts at each other out of separate trees. The most difficult thing in the world is to know how to do a thing and to watch someone else do it wrong without comment. They made me see that the world was beautiful if you were beautiful, and that you couldn't get unless you gave, and you had to give without wanting to get. Now, in their love, which was stronger, there were the seeds of hatred and fear and confusion growing at the same time, for love can exist with hatred, each preying on the other, and this is what gives it its greatest fury. He felt in his heart cruelty and cowardice, the things which made him brave and kind. If there is one thing I can't stand, it is stupidity. I always say that stupidity is the sin against the Holy Ghost. It has to be admitted that starving nations never seem to be quite so starving that they cannot afford to have far more expensive armaments than anybody else. I can see that you spoke in ignorance, and I bitterly regret that I should have been so petty as to take offense where none was intended. All endeavors which are directed to a purely worldly end, contain within themselves the germs of their own corruption. The fate of this man are that man was less than a drop, although it was a sparkling one, in the great blue motion of the sunlit sea. If it takes 1,000,000 years for a fish to become a reptile, has man, in our few hundred, altered out of recognition? It is generally the trustful and optimistic people who can afford to retreat. The loveless and faithless ones are compelled by their pessimism to attack. It is only the people who are lacking, or bad, or inferior, who have to be good at things. To disbelieve in original sin does not mean that you must believe in original virtue. It only means that you must not believe that people are utterly wicked. It happened like this in the world. Old things lost their grip and dropped away, not always because they were bad things, but sometimes because the new things were more bad, and stronger. He knew suddenly that nobody, living upon the remotest, most barren crag in the ocean, could complain of a dull landscape so long as he would lift his eyes. An ordinary fellow, who did not spend half his life torturing himself by trying to discover what was right so as to conquer his inclination towards what was wrong, might have cut the knot which brought their ruin. How can you have boundaries if you fly? Those ants of yours, and the humans too, would have to stop fighting in the end, if they took to the air. and in the winter, which was confined by statute to 2 months, the snow lay evenly, 3 feet thick, but never turned into slush. They made me see that the world was beautiful if you were beautiful, and that you couldn't get unless you gave, and you had to give without wanting to get. The increasingly cynical court thought Arthur hypocritical, as all decent men must be if you assume decency cannot exist. The only way I can keep clear of force is by justice. Far from being willing to execute his enemies, a real king must be willing to execute his friends. Wherever they went and wherever they slept, the east wind whistled in the reeds, and the geese went over high in the starlight, honking at the stars. It was a gray September day, with the blue and copper butterflies flitting in the aftergrass, the partridges calling like crickets, the blackberries coloring, and the hazelnuts still nursing their tasteless little kernels in the cradles of cotton. The author says people are guilty of wrecking the present because the future was bound to be a wreck. For in those days love was ruled by a different convention to ours. In those days it was chivalrous, adult, long, religious, almost platonic. It was not a matter about which you could make accusations lightly. Everybody is always saying what a parfait, gentle knight I am, but it has nothing to do with me. It is Arthur's idea. It is what he has wished on all the younger generation, like Gareth, and now it is fashionable. At this the wart's eyes grew rounder and rounder, until they were about as big as the owl's who was sitting on his shoulder, and his face got redder and redder, and a breath seemed to gather itself beneath his heart. In the course of a long experience of the human race, I have learned that you can never make them understand anything, unless you rub it in. The heart of tragedy does not lie in stealing or taking away. Any feather-pated girl can steal a heart. It lies in giving, in putting on, in adding, in smothering without the pillows. Although they are often ready to play the buffoon to amuse you, such conduct is the prerogative of the truly wise.